On a recent trip to the animal kingdom at Disney World, we stopped to figure out what everyone was watching. A group of gorillas. There was the alpha male, the youngsters, the mother with the baby on her stomach, had everyone smiling and pointing, but off to the side, leaning up against a rock wall, there was a young male. He was looking off into the distance, not meeting our eyes, and listlessly chewing on a stalk. He looked like a sulking teenager, wishing he were anywhere but here. And I thought, what's his life like? So I asked the guide, what is he experiencing right now? And she explained that he knew that we were watching him, that we were in the dominant position, and he was showing deference by looking away from us. As I continued to watch him, I felt myself wanting to make a connection. I wanted him to look back into my eyes. I wondered, how would I feel if I were in his position? And as I continued to watch him, I realized that all along I was assuming something. I was assuming that both of us were selves. The one self looking at the other avoiding being looked at. For centuries, philosophers like me have either been repelled by the idea that animals can think and perceive, or slightly open to the possibility that there's something going on in that animal mind. And though they agree that there are commonalities between humans and animals, humans always end up being the more special and superior species. And we're all pretty comfortable with that. We like that, right? Okay? Now, you might be saying, who cares what the philosophers think? I mean, philosophers? Come on, you know? But we've always had the unpopular job of deciphering, debating the questions that are floating around in the backs of people's minds. Questions like, what does it mean to be a good person? Or, can we prove God exists? That question, that's why we make the big money. That one right there. Okay, well, we need philosophers to continue to decipher and debate these questions because the answers to those questions impact our lives in obvious and not so obvious ways. So when another philosophy colleague of mine, Dr. Leon Niemaczynski, invited me to work with him on a project on animal consciousness, I was intrigued. He had already immersed himself in the topic, while I'd been studying human consciousness for years. Together, we formulated a new set of questions. First, in light of the data from neuroscience and research on animal consciousness, had the big thinkers of the past really understood the nature of animal minds? Second question, given this new data, should Leon and I take a closer look at their mental lives? Now, you might think this talk is going to be about animal cruelty or factory farming or something like that, but it's much bigger than that. It's about reevaluating everything we think we know about animals and our relationship to them. And we will start by exploring what some of the greatest minds in history had to say about the matter. There's Aristotle, known as one of the fathers of Western philosophy, an authority on nearly all topics, and a zoologist. He placed humans and animals along the same biological continuum. However, he maintained that humans are ultimately different because they can reason, they can think logically, and most importantly, they produce culture. Was Aristotle right or wrong? We know that that gorilla can feel something, pain or pleasure, but can he produce culture? The answer is surprising. Cognitive ethologists studying brain sizes of various animal species have found that these animals not only socialize, but they do show signs of basic culture. For example, whales and dolphins bond with one another. They teach one another how to hunt. They play games, and they even parent one another's offspring. Yes, they babysit. Yes. Elephants organize themselves into extended, cohesive family units. They hold meetings to make group decisions, and they exhibit mourning rituals, covering the bones of their dead with dirt and leaves as they bury them, and then returning to these graves for years after. So Aristotle was not entirely correct. Much later, we come to Rene Descartes. He initiated the early modern era of philosophy, and he is known as the guy who says, "I think, therefore I am." He also rejects the idea that animals can reason. He sees them as not much more than living machines because they're unable to understand the sensations that they're feeling. In other words, they lack self-awareness. They might be able to vocalize what they're feeling and mimic human speech in some sense, but the sounds that they're making are not arranged in any kind of meaningful syntactical pattern. And without meaningful communication, how can we know there's a mind at work? It's an interesting question. Is animal communication a form of language? The research has sparked a lot of debate around the topic. We have studies that analyze the composition of bird songs, breaking them down into individual sound units following a certain pattern based on the kind of intonation and rhythm they display. The same bird can even develop different variations of one song, kind of like a dialect. Another study analyzed the distress calls of kittens and found that each kitten had such a distinct vocalization that the mother was able to pick out her own infant from among the group. So obviously there's meaningful communication going on there. Our next thinker, John Locke, let's say he represents a turn that happens during the Enlightenment. He will admit that animals perceive what's going on around them, and therefore they can think in basic ways. Now, what is it that allows them to perceive? They have access, as we do, he argues, to something called a simple idea. Well, what do we mean by a simple idea? Something like, this banana thing tastes good. Now, he stops here. He rejects the idea that they can go further, that they can perform complex, abstract tasks and think logically. But again, recent studies challenge this conclusion. We now have an abundance of evidence showing that different species can solve different kinds of problems. For example, New Caledonian crows create tools out of twigs and leaves so that they can extract caterpillars from cracks and crevices in stone. They can even design different versions of the same tool and make improvements to it to better extract that food. Pigs and cows and hyenas show executive functioning when faced with certain challenging tasks. A recent study at the University of Sydney in Australia put cows in a maze and found that they were able to successfully navigate and decide which way to go in the search for their food reward. Aristotle, Descartes, Locke, and other thinkers, their ideas about animal consciousness fail when put to the test of modern science. So, in light of the recent data from neuroscience and cognitive ethology, we should return to our original questions. Question: are humans essentially different from animals? That is, are humans essentially different from other species of animals? The research on animal minds points in one direction. Animal consciousness parallels human consciousness in striking ways. And if this is the case, we will need to revisit our old assumptions. Animals may not be like us in every way, but they're enough like us that they experience their lives in similar ways. And the key there is experience. Now, just as we're coming to these realizations, the great irony is that right now we are facing the 6th mass extinction of all animal species, in part due to climate change and human activity. We see pictures like this one of whales that have ingested such huge quantities of plastic that they're dying of malnutrition. We're losing butterflies because as we lose their habitats due to the growth of cities. So we contribute to their extinction to some degree because we don't recognize our close connection to them. Some contemporary philosophers have been moving the discussion in a different direction. Peter Singer, for example, argues that it's not really important whether we can figure out if animals can reason. What we should be asking is, can they feel pain and suffer? Since we are in the unique position to do something about that suffering. But we can go further. If it's true that animals are more than just aware of what is going on around them, well, does that mean that they're having the same kind of experience of being alive and conscious that we have? Do they have subjective awareness? Let me explain. Right now, it feels like something for you to be sitting in your chair. It feels like something for you to be aware of listening to me. This feeling like something is what philosophers call the subjective or phenomenal quality of experience. It's more than just the sensation of sitting or hearing. It's the sense that this sensation belongs to a someone, you, the subject. Our final philosopher today, Thomas Regan, argues that we can no longer ignore the evidence. Animals do have subjective experience. He states, they can see and hear. They have beliefs and desires. They have individual and group memory. They can solve problems and play games. They experience their lives in ways that matter to them. So how are they not the subjects of their own lives? So, if some species do show forms of consciousness that are continuous with, but not identical to human consciousness, can we really continue to assume that we are essentially different from them? I'd like to leave you with this thought today. We've seen that we share fascinating aspects of mind with other creatures. Let's consider what this means. What does it mean for any species to live a life that matters? It means there may be no us and them, but rather a we. Thank you.